Welcome to Storycomic Presents, where we interview amazing storytellers and artists. This is episode 120. I'm your host, Barney Smith of Storycomic.com, and we're excited to have with us the internationally acclaimed, Eisner-nominated, and award-winning comic creator, Scott Chantler.
Woo!
Scott, how's it going?
Yeah, I am well.
You're well, and you just before we went on the air, talk about like you've been a pretty busy in the last couple of months for you. You just bought a new house. You're working on Squire and Knight, one of your upcoming projects, and just are coming out of Battober as well. So
yeah, Battober, man. I finished this new project I'm working on for First Second, Squire and Knight. I finished book one just in time for the end of September when it was due. And I thought, yeah, let's do Battober again this year. And it would have been great, except sometime in there I also bought a house. And it's been a crazy few weeks.
Right. And so check it out for those for all you Scott Chantler fans out there. You put these some of the on your shop as well. So
I know Chris Somney, who originated Battober, always auctions them, but I don't have the time to keep track of an auction. I just threw them all up in my store with the price that would have been the buy now price on eBay. Right. And let people let the feeding frenzy commence. And it did. The first few hours of when I first put them up was pretty crazy. I made a lot of money in about 10 minutes.
Yeah, I see that a lot of them are sold out already. That's awesome.
A lot of them are gone, and some of the ones that are left are sold out, and it's pretty nice. There are a few left. People can go to the shop and scoop up one of the 4 or 5 that are left if they want. Because it's might as well make it a clean sweep.
Right. And this is one of the benefits of actually being a comic creator that still works with pen and ink. And
I'm a big fan of ink and brushes. I mostly pencil digitally now. Mm-hmm. I like being able to kind of manipulate stuff at that stage and shrink it 25% or whatever I need to do, tilt it a little bit without having to redraw it. Right. I like digital tools for stuff that digital tools do well. Right. Like that kind of helps me improve my thinking and be able to experiment a bit without a huge time commitment. But when it comes to inking, I'm still very much, I'll output stuff to Blue Line on a piece of Strathmore Bristol and push ink around paper the old-fashioned way, which I really that's my favorite part of it. I know some artists hate inking. To me, that's like dessert. Right. You've already done the storytelling work and a lot of the structure in the drawing, and now you're just going in and giving it a nice polish and the drag of the brush on the page and all that stuff. It's just it's the part of drawing I enjoy most. So I'm reluctant to give up the hands-on approach for that one step, and then it's back into the computer for coloring. But right. For that one part of it, traditional tools all the way.
And then you utilize Photoshop for coloring, and then you use I just recently learned this as well, using InDesign as the lettering as well.
Yeah, I've done. I still kind of move around and experiment a lot with technique and stuff, even though I'm like 14 books into my career at this point. I still change it up a little bit every book, but a lot of book publishers in particular, use InDesign for laying out their books, and the text tools in InDesign are actually pretty good. Maybe not for sound effects, lettering and stuff like that, but for word balloons and stuff, perfectly good. And it's right there in the print file that the publisher can change for foreign markets and blah blah blah, and it tends to work out really well.
And so, as you mentioned earlier too, I mean, one of the pieces of the inking, I think so. One of the things you mentioned in a previous interview is to kind of give yourself some of that time and space and making sure you have that schedule enough to, because of the part of the inking, as you kind of talked about, is there's a level of maybe like therapeutic or meditativeness to it, where there's, does it kind of like have a calming effect to you because you kind of know ahead of time that you don't have to rush on something, as well as gives you that time to do the inking?
Yeah, I love it. Like I say, the inking stage is really a pleasure for me. It's a treat, and I do kind of get really, like, I try to be as relaxed I can when I'm drawing anyway. But I think during that phase in particular, like, my girlfriend just works at this desk behind me a lot of the time, and she says sometimes she has to like check and make sure I'm still alive over like my breathing has kind of slowed down so much, and yeah, I've freaked her out a couple times.
So before we went live, we had I was talking to you about that this past event. This is one of your, I think this came out in Bix, which came out in early 2020.
Yeah,
so,
April 2020, the worst time in 100 years to release a new book. Yeah. Timing is what I'm all about.
You're all about the timing.
Yeah. Way to time that market, Chantler.
Good job, Chantler.
Yeah.
I gotta say too, I was lovingly blaming you for the fact that it was such a great read. It was the only book I took for the week for me when I went on my first vacation. We went on with the family for about 18 months. Try to match our name. I try to match our nameplates to the colors that you put into the book. So I don't know if I got it quite right with our video nameplates that I just changed it to. A little bit. Yeah.
Ballpark.
What I loved about what you talked about this, I mean, first of all, we can have you kind of jump in and just kind of talk about the book a little bit. But what I loved about when you mentioned it was, and you focused a lot on the panel setup, and it was one of those aha moments when I listened to you talking about it, where you said that each panel is a sentence, each page is and then each page is, you see it as a paragraph.
Right.
And you also talked about you like to draw the panels out first. Is that still something that was this specific to Bix, or is this something you've kind of taken with even with like Two Generals and All Stars and some of your other ones that you've always you kind of lay out how you want the panel set up in the page first?
Yeah, Bix is kind of the ultimate expression of the way I've always thought about comics, which is very rhythmically. Mm-hmm. We were joking about timing a few minutes ago, but like, timing really is important in my work. Yeah, I had always wanted to do a book about music for that reason, to kind of, play with timing in a really meaningful way. But yeah, you were talking about kind of, panels and paragraphs and stuff like that. Like, there's a lot of freedom in comics. Right. You're bound by the four edges of the page, at least in print comics.
Right.
But other than that, you can divide the page up any old way you please.
Right.
And so the way that you divide it up becomes very meaningful. And I did a book 11 years ago now called Two Generals. Mm-hmm. I happen to have a copy right here. Look at that.
There it is.
Very convenient. And it's about my grandfather's experiences in the Second World War. And it is built on, comics fans will be familiar with the 9-panel grid kind of technique like that.
Right.
And that creates a very kind of, when the more you've divided the page up, the more you're dividing it up into smaller units of time. And when the panels are all the same size and shape like that, it creates a very kind of precise staccato rhythm to how you read it, which is appropriate for a story about the military, and which is very much about time and small increments of time. So yeah, like that was a thing I wanted from Two Generals from the start. I knew it would be kind of structured visually like that, which fits the themes of the story. Where the idea for Bix came along was when I was working on Two Generals, I would often think, what would be the opposite of this? You know, where there just were no rules and, you know, I could just be as free as could be with the page layouts. And you know, that led me to the idea of doing a book about music and eventually a book about jazz, which is, you know, as free as music gets. So what you get with Bix is, for people who have not seen the book, is, you know, you get a lot of this, which is like a 5-panel strip on each page, 10 panels when you have the book open. And this is sort of, you know, how regular life is presented in the book. Yeah, just kind of the, you know, boring, regular rhythm of normal life. When Bix discovers classical music as a child, represented by the piano, the panels start to kind of bounce up and down like musical notes. And then when he gets into jazz,
I love this part. Yeah.
You know, well, here's a very early example. The panels start to change size and shape and, you know, move around a little more freely. And then as he gets older and he evolves and his music evolves, you know, eventually you get into stuff like, hold on, I'm looking for one of the Louis Armstrong bits, because those are
with all the yeah.
It's
like a collage almost.
Yeah, so like when we get to the height of his kind of jazz years, you know, you get this. And then eventually, as you know, he writes this pretty extraordinary piece of music called In a Mist that sort of combines jazz elements with traditional classical music elements. So by that point in the book, you get this, which is the classical music rhythm laid over top of the jazz layout. And that's as sophisticated as the book gets conceptually, and also as sophisticated as Bix gets musically. So the two kind of work together, you know, hopefully in that way.
So when you wrote Two Generals, and then you found, and you said, what would it look like with this very methodical 9 panel pages.
Yep.
And you're looking for that jazz. So did you actively go out and look for Bix's story, or did Bix's story find you?
I think I'm a sort of a casual jazz fan. I'm no expert, but I'm a music fan in general, and I know what I like. I think I was aware of Bix Beiderbecke from the Ken Burns jazz documentary from the early 2000s. I know there's some Bix material in that. And so I'm sure I knew who Bix Beiderbecke was. And it probably didn't take me long to settle on him. His story is pretty interesting.
Right.
I mean, his music is kind of interesting in its way, but he's also an interesting character in that he, spoilers, drank himself to death at 28. Like a lot of musicians, did himself in. He was a genius, but also a very self-destructive genius, which of course is a story we've seen again and again, in music and a lot of other, arts and stuff as well. So, there was a certain degree to which he just kind of fit what I wanted to do. There was a certain degree to which his life kind of became a blueprint for others as the 20th century moved along. He's an interesting character. He's a really, really interesting, biography and interesting musically. So, he seemed to be a good fit. I really don't remember even considering anybody else.
Wow.
Yeah.
And so how much have you been able to, just from the layout piece of it, have you get a lot of feedback from other readers that have read that who immediately noticed it right away? Like, hey, I saw that this is set up like this, or is that kind of a delightful surprise that people said, hey, did you notice that when you did the jazz, you kind of moved everything? What's been some of that feedback you've seen from readers about that setup?
I mean, in some respect, it's been tough to get any feedback from readers at all, because it's been the pandemic for the entire time the book has been out.
Right. Yeah.
And I've only just started doing shows and encountering fans again. A little bit of fan mail has trickled in, but like, honestly, when the book came out, bookstores weren't even open, and a lot of people just did not know about the book. A lot of people are learning about it now that I'm out promoting it, but yeah, there has not been a flood of readers wanting to tell me about their experience. That said, yeah, kind of like with Two Generals, some people seem to get it and connect with it and understand
Right.
what my intentions were, and yeah, connect with it right off and clearly. And others are more like, just like, oh, that was interesting. that was different. It tends to be the two reactions to my work.
Right.
Is
Yeah.
like, oh my God, this kicked me right in the stomach. Best book of the year. And the other reaction is, yeah, interesting.
Was it so? Yeah, and even the point how you have things like, as you said, how the panels reflect what's happening with them, even in some of those the manic parts where it was there, and then not to spoil it, but even at the ending part of it, how you laid out the panels near the end was really really cathartic in a way too, which was, I thought that was powerful.
Yeah. I always want people to feel it.
Right.
And my work can be very kind of theory driven and intellectual when I try to describe it, but mostly I just want to give people that kick in the stomach. I usually pick something that's emotional for me, and that I want to be emotional for the reader as well. And if I'm using all of my craft and ability to to create that response, I still want that emotional response. Like when people tell me they cried at the end of Two Generals, I'm always relieved because I'm like, oh, they read the book that I wrote.
Right.
Right. And yeah, I definitely want people to feel that ending to Bix, and yeah, you use the art form as best you can, and that's something comics do really well, is those gaps and silences. People really feel those. It's hard to describe emptiness in prose.
Right.
Like I a million years ago, I saw or read this interview with Neil Gaiman, who of course writes comics and also prose, and somebody asked him in this interview, what he, what the big difference was and what he missed most about writing comics. And what he said was silent panels. That in prose, it's really hard to describe someone doing nothing.
Right.
Right. Because you still got to fill that page with words either way. In comics, you don't necessarily have to. That spacing and that timing becomes really important.
Right.
Yeah.
And you said you mentioned before too in another interview that, like, somebody asked you, is like, why do you like doing like historical work? You mentioned, like, you just love doing the research. Like, the research is so, like, how to, like, in Two Generals, about how the boots are tied right, or how to all these different things. When you researching Bix, you went to Dayton, Ohio, you went to Chicago, and what would be some of your advice that you would give comic creators who just kind of like stick to, well, I like creating my own worlds, I like doing all this stuff, that way I don't have to research things, but I always I learned about this historical event and nobody else seems to know about it, and I really want to write a story about it. What would be your advice to them if they're hesitant to jump into doing a historical an historical event on a graphic novel size?
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, it's a lot of work. Like it might have been overstating it to say I enjoy it, but I think on some level you feel compelled. Um,
Right.
like with the book about my grandfather, came about just purely out of my curiosity. When I hit the age in my 30s that he was during the war, I became obsessed with
Right.
reconstructing what had happened to him over there. And it wasn't even going to be a book at first. It was just, personal interest. And then, the book came about just as a way to convince myself to do all the necessary research. With Bix, it came about more, like I say, kind of reverse engineering, let's find a subject that fits this, creative experiment I want to do.
Right.
But either way, I'm only able to do one of these historical books about every 10 years because they just about kill me. The research is, it really adds to the, making a graphic novel of any kind, will take you a couple years. And, when you have to throw in a year or two of research on top of that,
Right.
it's not for the faint-hearted. You really got to want it. And, I don't think you do it unless you were really personally motivated to research that subject and know, everything there was to know about it. There's also the internet to contend with too, because I mean, everyone out there is an expert on everything, and it was one thing with Two Generals, which was my grandfather's story, and to a certain extent, what I said goes.
Mm-hmm.
But with Bix, Bix himself didn't, have any heirs, but the, Beiderbecke family certainly did. And they're very protective in a lot of ways of Bix. And there's a small, but very hardcore, collection of Bix historians out there who, are happy to tell you where you've gone wrong. And, even with like going back really early in my career, I did a book called Northwest Passage, which is fiction, but is set against kind of historical stuff during the fur trade here in Canada, during that era. And I read an entire blog post someone had posted, critiquing the beards of the various characters and whether they were or were not appropriate, for period characters, at that time. Like I say, it's a big internet out there, and everyone's a damn expert, or considers themselves one. And you will spend the rest of your life reading blog posts about your characters' beards,
Right.
and this is. If you're going to do historical work, I guess this is where I'm going. You got to be ready for that. And you've got to, you've got to be making your choices, knowing that they're going to be wrong to, a certain number of people on the internet, and they'll be happy to let you know. And you gotta have thick armor. You can't be one of those people whose day is ruined if someone on the internet said you were wrong about something.
Did you have, so also with that, I'm just kind of curious for you too, is like when I don't know, do you feel as though because as a writer and a comic creator, and you find a story that you find a story about somebody historically that not a lot of people know about, is there a sense of obligation, like, well, it looks like I need to write something about this because nobody knows about this? Is there any level of ownership or obligation that you feel when, like, for instance, with Two Generals and also with Bix?
Yeah. With Two Generals in particular, the more I learned about, my grandfather went in on D-Day, which of course everybody knows about, but the climax of that book is set in a small French town called Buran about a month later. Not enough people know about that battle,
Right.
Which was absolutely devastating for my grandfather's regiment, if you've read the book. And when I began researching, there wasn't a lot to read about it, and if anything, that made me, like you say, want to do it more. I felt there should be a light shone on that. Bix Beiderbecke is very well remembered in Davenport, Iowa, not Dayton, Ohio, which you said.
Oh, sorry, Davenport. Yeah, okay.
There are certain people out there who will be very angry, so I couldn't let that pass. He's very much the hero of that city. There, everything in town is Bix this, Bix that. There's a Bix run in the summer. There's a Bix Beiderbecke museum there, which conveniently had just opened when I started doing my research. But outside of that, outside of people who are very early jazz fans and people who live in Davenport, Iowa, not a lot of people necessarily remember Bix Beiderbecke. And so in that respect, it was interesting. It wasn't like doing yet another book about Louis Armstrong, although he is in the book, right, because they were contemporaries. It's interesting. One thing I really love about comics is that it's not a new art form by any means, but it's been so dominated by a genre or two over its lifetime that it's still very possible to do something new with it.
Right. Wow.
It's you can definitely have the first Canadian World War II graphic novel. You can have the first graphic biography of Bix Beiderbecke. There's still a lot of new ground out there for comics, which is exciting.
Right.
Yeah.
And so how much do you do as almost as in a way is also not a specific thing across all of your work, but some of your themes I've seen, there's an educational component to it. Is that specific, and is that specific, or is that something where it just helps almost as a residual effect of the fact that you do research in a lot of these things?
Yeah, my work is very popular in schools and libraries, particularly here in Canada. And so I think a lot of people kind of think that, think of my work as, educational comics, right, or, stuff like that. And that's never that's never where I start thinking about a project. I'm always happy when, who doesn't love when their book sells a whole bunch of class sets to some school board? That's great. But I never start a project thinking, this will be big in the educational market. I think that's the wrong place to start. There are some pretty, no offense to people who do educational comics, but there's, a lot of them are pretty hokey. Yeah. And just amount to kind of illustrated textbooks.
It's like you're writing this, like, I'm going to learn so many people with this book.
Right, exactly. Like, it reminds me of when Two Generals first came out in 2010. A friend of mine who I did a library talk when it first came out, the day it came out, at the public library in my old hometown where I grew up and where my grandfather was from. And, it was a big deal. And a friend of mine who works for the school board there showed up, and she picked up the book that night thinking this, she, like I said, she works for the school board. I'm sure she just was interested in it as like an educational tool. And she called me a couple of days later saying, I read it and it's actually good. like I'll never forget it, because she was looking at it purely, like I say, as a teaching tool.
Yeah.
And like, here's a way we can trick kids into being interested in World War II history. But was surprised and pleasantly surprised to find that she could teach it as a piece of literature also. So that school board did end up adding the book to their curriculum, and they teach it it's a kind of a cross thing between English, history, and art. And I love that. Right. Yeah. It's not, like I say, it's not just some, wanky gimmick to trick kids. It's something that they, teach as a piece of literature and a piece of art and a piece of history. Right. And I find that very, very gratifying. And that's, that's just kind of the way I approach my work. I want it to be good and I want people to enjoy it or find it useful in whatever way they find it useful. But for me, I'm just trying to get a story out of the ground in one piece and just make sure I don't screw it up.
So we have a lot of comic creators that listen to this, and like a lot of people that want it. So what would be your advice? It's like one thing that you said before is like when you're learning it, you're taking taking some animation courses, some theater courses, some of these other things that were where we are now presently with access to education and what it is. What would be your advice? Would you advise someone who wants to go into sequential art or comics or writing? Would your advice be to go to school for that, or would you have other recommendations?
Oh, that's interesting. Would I recommend? I mean, I better say yes, because I used to, for 5 years, I taught at an art school in Toronto, writing for comics. Yeah. And, speaking just purely for my course, it was great. I turned out a few people who, are working now. There's a few people passed through my classroom that, I'm happy to say I shaped a little bit, or, gave them a appropriate kick in the pants. I mean, I think a lot depends on the program and the instructors and stuff. I know a few people of my generation who came out of the Joe Kubert School and really recommend it. I know there are a few programs here and there that you can take. My friend Chris Schweitzer used to teach comics at like Alberta. No, not Alberta. At Atlanta School of something. I don't know. Like I say, I think a lot depends on instructors. Right. And, if you can find somebody who's really good, who's also teaching somewhere, it's probably worth going there to learn what they know. I know it's becoming like a kind of a hipper thing to have sequential art programs at your college, and I'm sure they vary in quality, as do a lot of college programs. Mm-hmm. I guess my advice would be to find a good one and go, and if you can't, do it the old-fashioned way and just pick it up on your own, like I did. Right. And I say, on my own, but as you said, I knew this was what I wanted to do, so I took English literature, I took creative writing, I took drama, I took psychology, I took fine arts, I took film, I took animation, all this stuff just went in the pot and, got stirred up and comics came out. And, now if you can find one place to do all that, great. But if not, go learn it on your own if you can.
And so how important would you say also for comic creators is to maybe take like a finance class or a business class or something along those lines?
Yeah, I'm big on, I maybe they do now, but I wish more art schools had business classes, mm-hmm. or at least a business class. Right. When I taught writing for comics at this animation college in Toronto, I had I had the students in third year, and I had them late in the day on Friday. So those graduating students, I was the last instructor they had, often for the rest of their lives.
Right.
And so that last class, I would, I had them for 3 hours Friday night just before they graduated. We just put all the art aside, and I just lectured for 3 hours about copyright, contracts, finding an agent, all of that stuff. I crammed it all into one lesson. And they would be sitting there writing like mad because the good ones at least knew, like, this is stuff we're going to need to know.
Right.
And I tried to, even though it wasn't officially part of the curriculum, I felt duty bound before I sent them out into the world, out into the market, to arm them with at least a little bit of knowledge about what their rights are and how to protect them, and just how to get started in the business.
Right.
How to do their taxes and keep their receipts and write off their expenses, and nobody teaches you that stuff.
Right.
And they should. I mean, that's a big part. If you want to do this for a living, which you do if you've gone to an art school,
right,
that's a big part of it. That's a big part of it.
And so where do you see, it's weird because we know that we're around the same age where there was that there was the comics bubble burst, and all of a sudden, in the early to mid 90s, where it just looked like things weren't going anywhere. And now there's so much now where we are now. There's so much availability, and you can basically, as you were saying earlier, you can kind of start your own business if you wanted to. You can do there's so much accessibility to creating your own stuff.
Yeah.
Where do you see, you as Gen Xers, we're firmly into middle age. We got the millennials and the Gen Zers behind us. Where do you see comics going in the next 10 to 15 years?
Well, that's really interesting. The big story in comics in the last decade, even decade and a half, has been the book market opening up. And, in a big way. First with Scholastic's reprints of Bone, and then with Raina Telgemeier's stuff, which just took over youth culture.
Right.
Just like if you know any 11, 12-year-old girls, the best way to get on their good side, I've found, is tell them Raina Telgemeier. You're just instant best friends with and not just girls either, but my boys, when they were that age, just read her books until they fell apart.
Right.
She's like the Judy Blume of comics. Where was I going? So I think the book market has been huge, and that's not new anymore. But a lot of that stuff has been middle grade or young adult, that kind of stuff. I think where we're hopefully going next is we need a big book market, bookstore, book chain hit from the adult graphic novel world. Like last year, Durf had Kent State, which was pretty huge. For a while, I was thinking maybe this is it. Maybe this is the breakthrough, kind of into the adult bookstore market.
Right.
Not adult bookstore in the term of in the way we used to mean it. But you know what I mean.
Right.
Graphic novels in the book market that are not necessarily aimed at young adult or lower, because the young adult market is just a license to print money. And I kind of wish, and I'm going back to that myself too with this Squire and Knight series, but I kind of wish some of the creators who did stuff for adults were getting getting a little bit more of that action. And so, yeah, I'm kind of hoping that's where we're going, is that some of those Raina Telgemeier readers, you know, they're going to get older and they're going to keep reading comics.
Right.
And you know, hopefully they're going to discover Durf, and they're going to discover, you know, Seth, and they're going to discover Chester Brown, and they're going to discover, you know, God knows what. I mean, there's a lot of creators out there who do really amazing, sophisticated graphic novels for adults. You know, they just don't get, you know, they don't get those numbers, and they should. And so, yeah, I guess that's where I'd guess we were going. You know, obviously the internet is going to continue to be, webcomics will continue to be a thing. Ebooks will continue to be a thing. I don't think they're ever going to take over completely. I mean, people have been saying for 20 years they're going to take over, but you know, you'd need a microscope to find the royalties for ebooks on my royalty statements. They're a very small piece of the pie, and you know, even if 10 years from now they're 3 times as big, it's gonna be this big a piece of the pie.
Well, I mean, yeah, it's like basically, I mean,
yeah,
with the 50s, they talked about how television was going to destroy the radio, and
sure, yeah, I think a new technology comes along and people get all excited about how the new technology is going to take over, right. And it never does. It just divides the pie up a little into smaller pieces. You know, that's all. So, you know, I expect print and digital to exist side by side for some time, probably a few generations.
Yeah. But you kind of mentioned earlier a little bit on when you talked about how when you did the book reading of Two Generals, is where you had World War II vets that were there. You know,
yeah, I speak to a lot of veterans, or at
right.
least did. I mean, we're losing veteran World War II vets at an amazing rate, but
right.
Yeah, you know, yeah, I've been talking about that book for 11 years now. So early on, at least, there were often a lot of World War II veterans in the room.
Right.
Yeah.
And do you? I mean, you know, as that example, and as you mentioned, you know, with Bix, you had a lot of people who were fans of Bix or who knew Bix, and you did, you know, kind of looping back to what you're talking about with the future comics, is that we're still at that stage where you can probably find a new story that hasn't been told in comic form, whereas you probably can find any topic on anything written down already. Basically, is that, do you see as comic creators like yourself kind of expand out onto topics? So it's not necessarily about the format or the genre of the topic talked about, but it's just the topic itself. The more topics that are talked about, the more you're going to end up finding people drawn into the graphic novels and comic forms.
Yeah, I think so. I think, you know, in the last 20 years that, you know, comics have kind of shifted from being a monthly periodical market to being a you know, kind of more of a book graphic novel market.
Right.
We have seen the, you know, diversity of subject matter just explode.
Right.
You know, every now and then somebody plants a flag in some new, you know, land. Raina Telgemeier says, "Look at all the money that's over here in young adult," and everybody goes running that way.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's still lots of new territory to be staked out, and I say the wider the reach, the better. You know, I'm very big on comics, you know, structure and theory and all that stuff, and comics that work well as comics, but I think they also have to just work well as books. And you know, the pitch for a book doesn't always have to be, you know, this is a comic about X. It can just be, you know, here's a cool book about World War II.
Right.
I was amazed with how many like 80-year-olds were happy to read Two Generals and loved it. You know, because it was a book that spoke to them. It was about something they cared about. Maybe they were in the war, knew somebody who was, maybe they lost their uncle, maybe they lost their father, whatever. Yeah, to them, you know, because it wasn't pitched to them as like, here's a comic. It was pitched to them as, here's a book you're going to connect with about World War II. And that would be the case with, whatever. Like Lucy Bellwood is a terrific cartoonist who, is super interested in boats and ships and nautical this and that. And she's really good about promoting her books about, as her stuff is like, this is about boats and also it's a comic, right? But first and foremost, it's cartoons about boats.
Right.
And, so she gets all the boat people. She gets all the boat fanatics.
Right. So that a perfect example. Do you think there's still this societal stigma maybe with comics are kind of for kids where, like, for instance, having a graphic novel section at a bookstore or in a library kind of removes everything. For instance, this should be in the jazz biography section of the bookstore. Two Generals should be in the World War II history. So that way people can see it as
that's another good answer to your question about next steps is that, like I said, we're about the same age. You probably remember when, any comics, even it was Dark Knight Returns or something, would be in the humor section of the bookstore, right? And then, so it was a big deal when we finally got a graphic novel section, and that was a good step.
Right.
But you're right. The next step is to just have comics in every section of the bookstore.
Right.
Bix should be in the music section. Right. Two Generals should be in the history section, and in the graphic novel section too, for sure. But smart indie bookstores I've seen will shelve their graphic novels that way, and I always applaud it. I think get the shelve books by content, not by form, or at least not just by form.
Right.
So I wholeheartedly agree with you on that.
Yeah. So we're getting close to the hour. Did you want to talk a little bit about your upcoming project, Scott?
I don't really have any art to show or anything yet. We don't even have a cover finished, although the book the book is recently finished. But it's a bit of a change of pace after Bix. I'm doing this kind of all ages fantasy series for First Second. It is going to be a series. I'm diving right into book 2 next. It's a fun thing that's it's about a squire and a knight, obviously from the title, but the knight is this kind of overbearing blowhard who is just a kind of a big jerk. and the squire is the one who kind of is smart and solves all the mysteries and does all the legwork. And the knight goes off to fight the dragon, and the squire goes off to the local library and reads everything there is to know about dragons, and then goes and pulls the knight's ass out of the fire, and then the knight takes all the credit, right? It's that kind of dynamic. So kids are going to love it because it's it's about a kid who's smarter than an adult. And it's one of those things that, again, is going to be a subtle nod to reading and science and education and observation and all those good things without kind of hitting you over the head with it. Right. It's still going to work like a fun fairy tale without a lot of moralizing, but there is a theme that ignorance is bad and knowledge is good.
Yeah.
Which coming out of the pandemic, I think is a good, probably something that was on my mind.
Yeah. So you wrote it as well then?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I generally write my own stuff. I've worked with a few writers on things, particularly early in my career.
Jay Torres. Yeah.
Jay Torres early on. And there's been a couple things like, short stories for anthologies or something. Just a couple years ago, I hooked up with Cecil Castellucci for a short story for, I can't remember the name of the Planned Parenthood anthology, but we did a story for that we were nominated for an Eisner for, which was kind of surprising. I do these great big 250-page graphic novels, and then I do a 5-page thing for an anthology, and it gets an Eisner nomination. Right? Like, why am I working so hard? Just need to nail 5 pages.
Well, that's awesome. So, the timeline. So this is coming out as a how big is book one then for Squire and Knight?
Book one is 162 pages.
Wow. Oh,
Yeah,
that's bigger than Two Generals.
Yeah,
Two Generals is 152 pages.
Two Generals, because it's 9 panels a page. You get a lot done in a few pages with 9 panels a page.
Right.
Longer than Two Generals. You're right.
Wow.
Yeah.
And this is a series, right? You said there's going to be.
Yeah, I'm writing book 2 now. So book 1 is out early 2023, which sounds like a long time from now, but really isn't. We're nearly into 22 now.
Right.
Yeah. And then we're hoping book 2 comes out about a year later. So
okay.
Yeah.
And it's just going to be 2 books?
2 books is what we've contracted for now, but I'm hoping for, let's keep it going. Let's I'll do as many as they want me to do.
Until you kind of get that urge to do another historical graphic novel.
Right. Yeah, another decade. Another decade on that.
Yeah, it's like I want to know how the handsaw was invented. I'm gonna figure out who did that.
Right. Watch for my handsaw graphic novel. No word of a lie. Years ago, I really wanted to do. I don't know if this will even register with Americans. The Robertson screwdriver is like the square.
Yes.
It's like the square screwdriver, which is like the Canadian screwdriver.
Yeah.
And for years, I wanted to do a graphic novel about the development of the Robertson screwdriver, which sounds insane and probably would be, but it touches on a lot of things about, business and engineering and the kind of weird side-by-side relationship of Canada and the United States. And there's a lot of moving parts to it. I actually saw a documentary about it on TV, and I'm like, this would be great. And then I remembered that selling a graphic novel about a screwdriver is probably stupid. But like what we said earlier, though, if somebody wrote a historical book about it and someone did a documentary about it, then obviously there needs to be a graphic novel about it. It hasn't been done. I'll say that for it.
Yeah.
It would be new territory for sure for comic.
Yeah, so we can start the hashtag Scott Chantler's Robinson screwdriver.
Right.
See if that goes.
Robertson, a graphic novel by Scott Chantler.
Cool. All right. Well, Scott, thank you very much. This has been a fun hour. I appreciate you coming on.
Oh, you got it. I appreciate you having me. This has been great. I mean, with the pandemic and stuff, I mean, like I was saying earlier, I haven't gotten out much. I've started doing shows again in the last month or so, but other than that, there wasn't a lot of opportunities to promote the work or even talk about it with people. So, I really, really appreciate you having me on.
Yeah, and come back on when you're ready to when you have like Squire Knight out. So
back on, you bet I will. That. Spring 23.
Spring 23. I'll put you on the calendar.
Do it right now.
So I got my another question for you regarding. I'm gonna. Okay, what are we at? 34 minutes. I'm gonna have to timestamp this. I got it. Elizabeth, Daddy's in a meeting. Yeah, I can tie it later. Okay. All right. Don't know. About another 30 minutes. Okay. Go to bed. Kids are great. Kids are great. Yeah. But when it's like an hour past their bedtime, that's when they.
Yeah.
All right. Put the balloons away. Yeah. Put them there. Stop. Go. All right. There it is. All right.
So good.
So good.
Yep.
All right. Luckily, I was in between questions, so this will be an easy edit. So this will be good. Yeah.